Bacon's Rebellion was an exemplary radicalist movement because it was fueled by hate and fear against a group of people. The people of the colonies were afraid of Native American raids, and the guerrilla warfare raids of the Native Americans was new to the European immigrants. The hit-and-run style of the Native Americans frightened the settlers who wanted to be free from danger. The governor of the Virginia colony in 1676 was William Berkeley, who was despised for his friendly Native American policies. Since Berkeley would not retaliate against the Native Americans himself, Nathaniel Bacon and his followers chased Berkeley from Jamestown, burned the capital, and killed many Indians along the way. The KKK was a radical right-wing organization that was active during 3 separate time periods in American history. The KKK supported white supremacy, white nationalism, and extreme anti-immigration policies. They often used terrorist tactics to support and fight for their views. The first KKK began in 1865 following the Civil War and were opposed to Southern Reconstruction. They died out in the early 70s largely due to Northern military occupation. The second KKK began in the 1920s and is considered the least violent out of the 3. They were opposed to immigration at a time when it was higher than ever and wanted prohibition enforced more strictly. The third and last major KKK uprising took place in the 60s in response to the Civil Rights Movement and bombed many African American churches and schools.
Labor violence in the United States played a big role in transforming how the industries treated their employees. One of the biggest outbreaks of labor violence was the Homestead Strike, which started on June 30th through July 6, 1892, and occurred at the Homestead Works in the town of Homestead, Pennsylvania, between the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers and the Carnegie Steel Company. It started as an industrial lockout and strike that became a battle between strikers and private security agents hired by Carnegie. This was the second largest and one of the most serious disputes in United States labor history. The final result was a major defeat for the Union and a setback for efforts to unionize steelworkers. Another huge dispute that created violence among labor workers was the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was one of the largest civil uprisings in United States history. The battle was the result of economic exploitation of workers during a period of social transformation in the coal fields. This was for 5 days between August 25th through September 2nd, 1921, in Logan County, West Virginia, between 10,000 to 15,000 coal miners confronting an army of 30,000 police and strikebreakers backed by coal operators during an attempt by the miners to unionize the southwestern West Virginia coal fields. The battle ended after approximately 1 million rounds were fired and the United States Army intervened by presidential orders. Both of these disputes over labor started the awareness of appalling conditions faced by workers in dangerous conditions and brought political influence into businesses and affairs with its employees.
The Black Power movement began in the late 1960s and was critical of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, which they claimed was progressing too slowly. The father of the Black Power movement was Stokely Carmichael. Carmichael was the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, when it changed nonviolent to national, showing its transformation into a more violent Black Power organization. Malcolm X joined the Black Power movement in the mid-60s as well. With him, he brought the entire Nation of Islam into the Black Power movement. The Black Power movement dissipated in the 1970s and arguably lost more white majority American support than it gained for the Civil Rights Movement.
During the Vietnam War, the United States became polarized between those who advocated continued involvement in Vietnam and those who wanted peace. Many in the peace movement were students, mothers of the soldiers, or anti-establishment hippies, who were backed by many other groups. The main reason behind American opposition to the Vietnam War fell into the following main categories: opposition to the draft, moral, legal, and pragmatic arguments against United States intervention that was caused mostly by the media portrayal of the devastation in Southeast Asia. The draft was a system that targeted and threatened blue-collar Americans and African Americans. The protests of the lower and middle class were the driving forces in the movement against the draft in 1965, pushing the sentiment that the draft was unfairly administered. Beyond the draft was unfairly administered. Beyond the fight against the draft, anti-war protesters also made moral arguments against the involvement in Vietnam, which was especially popular among American college students. Another element of the American opposition to the war was the perception that United States intervention in Vietnam, which had been argued as acceptable due to the domino theory and the threat of communism, was not legally justifiable. Some Americans believed that the communist threat was used as a scapegoat to hide imperialistic intentions. Additionally, media coverage of the war in Vietnam shook the faith of citizens at home, and with no clear sign of victory in Vietnam, the media images of American military casualties helped to stimulate the opposition of the war in America.
The Weather Underground Organization was a radical left-wing organization who wanted to violently overthrow the government of the United States. They claimed that the American people were oppressed and held in inequality by the capitalistic and imperialistic American empire. They officially issued a declaration of war against the U.S. government in 1970 and began multiple bombing attacks against government buildings and banks. Many of the bombings were individually justified by the group as retaliations for various U.S. military involvements. The group disintegrated after the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam.